Good afternoon. My name's Tom Jensen, and today we're going to go through some challenges that our customers are facing, try to find out how we can help you or have me help explain how we can help you. Then we're going to go through some use cases or customer stories about their journey towards cybersecurity, and throughout and at the end we'll have questions and comments. So what is cybersecurity? I know it sounds simple, but really it's a concept. It's objective that you want to try to obtain, sort of like trying to stay healthy and without getting a virus, like we're all sitting at home or in our sequestration facilities. You want to get there by many different ways, though, and there's no real defined item that says you are cybersecurity compliant or that you've got a good program. Part of the idea is that it's a continuous process. And why is it there? We have a lot of different customers that are being faced with different regulations. The power industry has long been tasked with NERC and SIP, or National Electrical Reliability Council, and Critical Infrastructure Protection. But there's a lot of different industries that have been hacked lately. There's a lot of different things that you've heard of, like the Ukraine attacks and things like that. There's also a lot of public awareness of these type of things. People expect a certain level of security out of the customers they work with or the vendors they work with, as well as companies that you might entrust your data to. In many cases, industrial control systems, through a lot of the reports that I've been seeing and a lot of the surveys and things that are self-rated, a lot of them really lack a lot of even minimal protection. It's amazing sometimes that, like the Ukraine attack is an example where a $400 or $500 piece of hardware could have prevented a couple $100,000 worth of downtime and hours of impact of no power. So again, the cost of non-compliance can really be staggering when you put it all together, especially if you lose reputation or production. Towards this, we've got a poll that Matt's going to throw up there. We want to find out if you guys would like to rate yourselves and try to tell us where you are in your journey towards cybersecurity, whether you're confident with what you're doing, mostly confident but trying to improve, somewhat confident, you've got something in place but you're not really sure, or, oh gosh, not Homer Simpson moment, what is cybersecurity?
Yeah, and Tom, for some reason the poll's not working. I think it didn't save. So let's just imagine what people think about that, and I'll re-ask it again after we stall for a little bit.
All right. So my guess is that if you're sitting in on this and you're here for cybersecurity, that you all have a basic understanding of something that helps protect you, and you're probably maybe more in the somewhat confident. You've got something, you've thought about it, you've got some things that are in place, but you're looking for a way to help improve some of that. So how can we help you with that? One of the things that we did when we put together our program is I did a lot of research on various different standards and things like that. And the National Institute of Standards, NIST, has a good framework that's referenced throughout many different requirements or different industries. There's a lot of the ISA requirements, the IEC requirements that reference the NIST framework. So we took that 5-step approach and broke it down into our, what we call 4 quadrants that we can help you with. Matt's shown you some of those earlier. If you start at the beginning, which is always a good idea to have a plan in place, you want to sit down and you want to identify and assess your type of needs and vulnerabilities. Once you've defined those, you want to go through and detect attacks, protect from them. And then as those occur, you want to be able to respond to them as well as alert on them so that as things come up, you want to be able to find out what went on, how they got there, who should know about it, and what you would do. And then ultimately, after you've found out what's going wrong or what's happened, you want to be able to recover and prevent that from reoccurring. And again, once you're done recovering and preventing, you go back to the beginning, you look at what's been done in the past, what's worked, what hasn't worked. I see Matt's got our poll up here. So if you all would just entertain us, maybe click on one of those and we'll pause for a moment, or I'll talk slower for a moment while you guys answer that. So again, the main goal here is to know that there's 4 or 5 different items that you can do depending on how you break it down. You start with a plan, you do something, you respond to it, and then you recover and prevent it from reoccurring, and then go back and check again. Because as you might guess, the attack people or the hackers don't really stop. They just try until something works. So if you've defended across multiple times, it just means that you're going to be attacked again and you're going to be hacked again. So you've really got to continue to go through and check and recheck all the time. So again, we can help you with the identifying and assessing, recovery, disaster recovery, all the various pieces.
Hold that thought 1 second. You're kind of flying ahead here. So looks like we've got most of the poll results in. So before you start jumping in and asking another poll, let's end the polling. Looks like about half the folks voted here. So let's share those results. And Tom, if you want to talk to those, what do you think about that compared to what you've been seeing and what you've been hearing?
All right. So I did not guess. I did guess right. Somewhat confident is the most. They're 43%. Very confident. Very confident. You're confident at the moment, but you're still subject to attack and things like that. So hopefully you'll get a little better picture going through here where we can help you on those. And if you're sitting here, what is the thing that you think you're most interested in to start with? Again, these two are running one into the other, but I think from what we've seen in the past, people that are trying to figure out what's going on or trying to get a better picture, they really are in the identify and assess area in a lot of cases. So Matt, can you bring up that poll?
When you say that, you mean the next poll?
Yes.
Sure. That one's there. I don't know if you want to elaborate a little bit on the different answers here or different options here.
All right, so identify and assess. It's a good starting point. You need to put in place some sort of plan or procedures ahead of that. But those are things that you can work on together with your AutomaTech sales team or consultants that you might have. You need to set up something towards procedures and policies. So who will have access to this stuff? Who should have access to it? What is the method that we're going to go through and define what changes we'll make? How do we document them? And then how do we make sure that we made good decisions, usually by peer review or people on a council or some other group of members would go through, take a look at what you've done versus what you were trying to do. Does this accomplish that? And then go through and start to put in some items into place. And that's where the defend and protect or detect and protect comes from. You've got an idea of what you want to do. You're going to go out and do it. And then you're going to look at those items. You're going to respond and alert to them. The idea being that as they come in, you want to be able to see what worked and what I'm catching, what I was trying to catch. Are there things that might be slipping through or that I'm not paying attention to? And again, that's where some of your other procedures are going to come in place, because there's not a single product on the market that will be able to go do all of these things for you. It's really people, process, and technology.
Tom, I think you get some points there. I think that was the longest sentence without any pronunciation or punctuation I've ever seen there. So nice work on that. You stalled successfully for a minute and a half to get the poll results in. So let me share those with the group. And Tom, feel free to comment here on the results and see what what we see here. Oh, I have to hit the share button. Kind of what I was thinking. What were you thinking, Tom?
I was more thinking identify and assess, but if people are already, the majority or 43% had a good idea of what they were doing or were beginning and somewhat confident, maybe they've already got the identify and assess down and they might have procedures in place. So, yep, the next thing in line is defend and protect. You can really not do much if you've identified everything, but you don't defend against it. Great, you know what's coming in, but you've got to be able to stop it and do something with it. So defend and protect really takes on some of the procedures, the policies, and layered in with the hardware and the equipment and or software to be able to do it. We do have a question that came in, is deterrence possible for cybersecurity in addition to detect and defend? deterrence in what I would read as the traditional meaning, is it going to stop people from trying to attack me? No. I think sort of the answer is that anything that's connected to the internet is being attacked. I've done some serious studies, and it takes less than 30 seconds for something that's never been there, once it shows up on the internet, that it's getting pinged or poked from multiple different locations. When you start to chase down some of the attackers, they're coming from all parts of the world. Rarely are they coming from somewhere you would expect. They usually go into some group or block of IP addresses that's hard to say. So I don't think that cybersecurity is ever going to deter anyone from attacking. But the idea is that if you know you're under attack and you can defend against it, you're better prepared. So part of that leads into our next part. Really, how much security do I need? It's always a balance. You can spend a lot and not get much, and you can spend very little and get more. It depends on what you're trying to do and how you're doing it. It's really a balance of what can you afford to spend and how much can you afford to lose. And when what you spend costs more than what you can lose, you've gone overboard, you've done too much. Sometimes the cost of mitigation is really low and the cost for downtime is extremely high. So in that case, your security, you need to ramp it up a little bit to avoid expensive downtime. So this is sort of a preface. We've got Kevin is going to speak to us from Middlesex County. Kevin's worked with us on a project through Marty, and Marty will help talk through some of these things. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kevin to give us his viewpoint, what drove him to do what they did, working with us and working towards cybersecurity. Kevin.
Hey, how's everyone doing? So yeah, I'm Chief Technology Officer for Middlesex County Utilities. I have a PE in control systems and a S4 license in wastewater. So we've done many projects with AutomaTech over the years, and Marty asked me to kind of give a journey. So I was going to give you a little bit of background on where we started, even back 15, 20 years ago. But before I did that, I actually was going to put a link in the chat group for everybody. It's for MSISec. I don't know how many people have used MSISec. I just sent it out, so hopefully everyone can see it and click on it. If you take anything from me over the next 15 minutes, my recommendation is to sign up. So it's a nonprofit organization for mostly local government agencies, local, state, territorial government agencies. I do believe other people can sign up, but there may be a cost or different types of benefits for them. But they provide things like best practices they were talking about. They help you summarize ISA requirements, some monitoring tools. They send you weekly vulnerability updates for patching, including some control systems updates for GE, Rockwell, and so forth. We talked about assessments, was just in the poll. They have a cybersecurity framework assessment, which is a bunch of different domains grouped together, which gives you guidelines and standards to reduce your cybersecurity risk. It's essentially like a self-audit, but it gives you the tools to go in, give yourself grades, let you think about things you never thought about before. There are basic things like asset tracking, policies and procedures, change management. Are you following the Purdue model? So if anything, go to the website, check it out. It's a free service to government agencies. I think you'll benefit quite well from that. So starting our journey, going back almost 2 decades for me, or I think maybe 18 years, going back, I don't know how long, Matt, you and I met. But we had a standard, control systems. We did segmentation very well. Basic, iFix infrastructure, a couple servers, the clients, separate PLC networks. We had a classic historian, which eventually went to regular historian. And then we added a domain controller. But like anything, there's always the balance between cybersecurity and how I want my data, right? And so yesterday, I know we talked about a few mobility apps that we looked at. And 8-10 years ago, we went with this GE Mobility, which was kind of like the first generation of operations hub. And we really just want to be able to get our data anywhere that we were. Nowadays, it's even more important to have your data, but secure data from home. Like you have operators, you may be doing have some shift guys at home and some, a lessened crew at your facilities. So evaluating a secure way to have a mobile app or something is very, very important to us. Once people started using it, they couldn't get enough of it. But there's a catch, right? I mean, you think about it. We tried to do it right back 15 years ago. We bought a commercial firewall, put it in the DMZ. You block all your traffic from different subnets, right? Only allow the ports that you use from the devices. Don't just allow two networks. Say, oh, I need one device to talk from this network to the other network. Limit it down to what devices need to talk and what protocols do they need to talk. So, when you're evaluating these mobile applications and tools, think about what your needs are. Think about it from a security point of view. Is there a two-factor? Who's hosting it? Am I hosting it? Who's in charge of the maintenance? How secure is the infrastructure? It's not a one-size-fits-all. So as you go through these things, you see, hey, these are the offerings. Just give a little thought to, is it secure and how can I protect myself and my data? And going more of what we talked about today as far as network segmentation, this is something that you draw on a piece of paper, you look at the Purdue model, and you'll have cyber guys say, yeah, just segregate everything. It's very simple. And then when you actually go to implement it, it's very difficult because you have devices on your IT network that may talk to part of the devices on the OT SCADA, may need to talk to a PLC directly for some reason. So it's important to understand your network layout. As was just in the poll, we need to understand what we have and how it's laid out in order for you to implement a proper solution. So there are many devices that were mentioned even today that we use. So one being the Bayshore product. We installed the Bayshore SCADA fuse over at one of our pump stations that we have remote access to. And what we decided to do is we have VPN access to the pump station, and we have some industrial firewalls. But the problem with IT industrial firewalls is they don't do deep packet inspection of industrial protocols. So they can't say, hey, limit my Ethernet IP or my Modbus TCP, only do a read or a write. Most industrial firewalls have no idea what that even is. So what we decided to do, working with Marty, is we stuck this Bayshore device, the SCADA fuse, also inside the VPN connection. So even everything going over the VPN is now going to get scrutinized by the Bayshore device to protect us. So the plant now can safely get data out of the pump station. And one of our guys on his laptop is identified to actually go in and make changes, and that's it. I mean, the old school way of doing this on other pump stations was maybe you build some sort of RTU and you hardwire between the PLC and some sort of RTU device, because you know that, okay, if they hack the device, it's status only, and I can protect my infrastructure. So this was the first time I felt comfortable enough of putting one of our control systems even remotely close to an actual internet connection. And it was only because of the SCADA fuse. We actually did try a couple other products. They were very difficult to implement. One being their standard products work more like an IT firewall, where you have to create subnets on both sides. Where the SCADA fuse is very nice because it literally sits in line with your network. I think as the gentleman mentioned earlier, if it loses power or fails, it fails closed, so you can still pass your traffic. But it sits in line, and it sits on the same subnet on both sides. So you don't have to recreate a whole subnet when you go to put this device in. It fits very nicely into an existing subnet or existing infrastructure. And there's many other devices that they talked about for network segmentation. Tempered networks is good if you have no segmentation at all, and you need to start to segregate out what devices talk to which ones. Tempered networks has a good solution for that. So it's never one size fits all. Matt will tell you, and Bob Kulik and Marty, those guys tell you, we've met many times on many different products and find out what are we trying to accomplish? What's our goal? What's the best solution for us? And then of course, cost always plays a role in it. So evaluate the product, see where you need it. It may be a mix and match of each product. The other thing we've been evaluating with AutomaTech is this remote access. So remote access, especially nowadays, since we're all home, is key When I mean remote access, I mean directly to a PLC. So there was ways we used to do this through VPNs, program firewalls, who has access to what. How do I let my vendor only have access to one PLC versus my whole network? And in the past, we had a vendor who had access to two PLCs. We had those old RAD kits where they dialed in on a phone number. They converted, that to a serial connection, and they went into the serial port. Well, guess what? The PLCs don't have serial connections anymore. And so how do I accomplish this? And so, there's products that you are out there. You can evaluate them yourself, Moxa, Bayshore, where you stick a device or a gateway on your PLC network. You give it access to the internet, but only outbound traffic. And then through a cloud-based connection, you then can, through two-factor, and again, thinking of security, two-factor, you can give permissions to people based upon who they are, what they can get to on your network. Is it one PLC? If it's my guy internally, my automation engineer, I can say, hey, you can get to any PLC on any of the networks. But a vendor like Angwell can only get to my RTOs that are their equipment. So these are things that are making our lives easier. I always caution making PLC changes, but if you have to connect and troubleshoot, those are things that you have to do sometimes. I mean, going back 2 years ago, I traveled to Germany for work, and I was able to connect from Germany to my plant to fix a PLC problem. They were not happy with the cellular bill they got for work, but they were happy that the problem was resolved. So these are things that give us the flexibility to do what we need, but in a secure way, and in a way that is more geared toward OT than IT. Also, we in the poll, they mentioned disaster recovery. So going back for us, I don't know, 8 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, we decided at our central treatment plant to virtualize all of SCADA. One of the reasons for doing that was for ease of management. But one of the big things to do was disaster recovery. So what I mean by virtualize is we actually decided to buy Stratus servers, which are the fault-tolerant servers. We compared a Stratus server with a Dell infrastructure. We had one of each, and we quickly learned that the Stratus responded to a single point of failure better than a Dell system. When you use a VxRail system or a VMware cluster, you have to have N+2. There's always has to be someone to dictate what happens to the VMs if there's a single point of failure. And so we decided to go change out the Dell cluster to a Stratus server, and we rolled out all of our images on VMware. I believe, if I'm wrong, Adam can correct me, it was a year and a half ago at Christmas, a couple days before we were on vacation, and we get an alert that one of our nodes on a redundant iFix SCADA failed, crashed, done, blue screen to death. First time I ever had a blue screen on an image. Him and I were both on vacation, and we both were able to connect to the plant, go to the VM backup, restore it, and get it up and running all within 2 hours. And it really would have been under an hour if I didn't have to fight with GE's licensing server. But lesson learned with GE's licensing server, it's that simple to go in, get something restored, and keep your process running. Luckily, again, we had redundant iFix. The whole process kept running, but to give them the reliability from a second failure, we went in right away and took care of it. So these are things to think about on not just, okay, how do I get my data out? How do I use it? But now, okay, if there is a failure, what's my incident response? What do I do if there's a disaster recovery and I lose my infrastructure? How do I move forward in that regard? And last, it's always important to educate your staff, right? So have rules and policies in place, even if they're just a policy and you can't always necessarily enforce them, such as we don't allow OT laptops for programming on the internet, right? You may get access to your SharePoint, but they are not to go web browsing, no shopping, no Facebook, social media. That's forbidden, because what ends up happening is you get a virus and you have endpoint security and protection on it. But if they then take that laptop and they connect to your OT infrastructure, you're asking for trouble. So we actually give the OT guys, the automation engineers, 2 laptops, one for IT and one for OT. We understand that if they need to get a file, they need to download something, they had to go to GE's website to get an update. They got to go to whoever you use for automation to get an update. Fine, but there's a specific task and a reason for you to go to the website. The other thing I think that will start helping us, and luckily we've kind of made this transition at Middlesex County Utilities, is how IT and OT interact. Luckily, a couple years ago, I was in charge of just OT and started realizing we really need IT support. And like most of us, IT doesn't really want to get involved with OT. So I was thankful I was able to hire an IT personnel, but strictly for OT. And after years, the OT department ended up helping the IT department more often than not. And that's kind of how I got put in charge of both. And the transition we decided to make was, okay, everything that's in the OT environment, that's really IT, give it to the IT people, just like they would support the accounting department, just like they would support your operations department. OT guys aren't, great with networking. Give that assignment to your IT department and have your OT guys stick to what they know and get the staff that you need. The other thing we've done is hired a cybersecurity consultant. We debated whether hiring someone on staff or as a consultant. We thought we'd get more bang for our buck just to get us up and running to hire a consultant. We used this company, actually it was RevSec. We used RevSec last year to do an audit for us, similar to the cybersecurity framework that I mentioned before, which is recommended through MSISEC. We did an audit, so you kind of know where you stand, right? It's not a knock to say you're doing things wrong. It's just, here's where you stand. It was on the OT and the IT side, and this is what you need to improve on. And for us, actually, most of it was we did a lot of things in an ad hoc way. I mean, we did things well, segmentation. So it was more of documents and policies was probably our biggest thing we wanted to start implementing. And I'll just finish with this. I mean, you guys remember Jurassic Park, the original one, where I think Ian says your scientists were so preoccupied on whether they could, they never stopped to think if they should, right? So as you're doing things, if you get excited, you want to implement new technology, get, these PLCs and the data in my hand on my tablet. And it's great to know if you could do it, and you probably can. I mean, you can do almost anything you want nowadays. But just give some thought to think if you should, or at least how you should go about doing it. Just to go open up ports on a firewall and say, okay, now I can put my computer, my skating computer on the internet, and I can get data everywhere, because you're asking for trouble. So just, have someone on your staff, whether it's someone who you can train, but who questions some of the things you do from a cybersecurity point of view. I joke and sometimes call them, the get back coach, right? In football, the coach gets excited, wants to run on the field, and get back coach is saying, no, yeah, it's good, we're doing great, but just, get back, don't get a penalty. Think about this before you go and do it. So with that, I'm kind of,
yeah, Kevin, thanks for elaborating there. Really appreciate that. And I think more than anything, I appreciate the reference to Jurassic Park. I really hope that was specifically done for Bob Kulick. I don't know if you planned that or if that was just accidental, but I love it. Love it.
That was accidental. So
accidentally on purpose. So, hey, one of the questions that came through from the group here is regarding OT laptops. So they asked the question about what technology you'd use to prevent OT laptops from being used outside. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yes. So there's different things you can do. So depending on who it is, there's different groups. Some of the people, such as our engineers, who I put more trust and faith in to say, don't go on social media. We allow them to have internet access, but we may restrict what websites they go to. Most of it's done in the firewall itself. And there's ways to do that. So you can say you're hard coding their NIC so that it only connects to your Wi-Fi, and then preventing your firewall from giving that internet access, right? Going to their computer and not turning their NICs off. So there's a wide range on how you want to do this, to where we have some tablets and laptops that will have no internet connection whatsoever. They just can't. It's just through group policy and setting the laptop up itself, they just can't access the internet. Then there's some where we give a little more leash and say, okay, I know you need internet access to do your job, to download firmware updates, to get PLC programs off of SharePoint. So we're giving this to you, but it's our policy that you are not to do this, and there'll be consequences if you are. So you kind of have to say, you know, what groups of people can I trust and which groups of people do I have to have locked down and say, no, you can't have this. You can't have internet access.
Great. Thanks for elaborating on that. Appreciate it, and appreciate you taking the time to go ahead and do this. Tom, Marty, any other questions or follow-ups here for Kevin?
Kevin, what's been the hardest part? I know what I've seen in the past. I'm just curious if it's the same experience, that policies and procedures may be the hardest to successfully implement and monitor.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it was policies and procedures. I mean, I was always, and because again, we're a utility authority. We don't have a huge staff. It is growing, and I appreciate the support I have from the executives at Middlesex County. But we don't have a huge staff. So my thought process always was, well, should I write about it or should I just do it and implement the security? So I would always just do it and implement the security and document later if I had time. You know, sometimes it's just step basis, right? And the whole thing is think big, start small. That's what we're talking about. It's just to get going. And that's why one of the reasons we hired a cybersecurity consultant, one, just to do the audit, see where we're at, and then help us a lot with implementing policies and procedures that we were missing or didn't have documented. But as far as we were lucky, we had a good base to start on 15 years ago as far as network segmentation. But some of it's just evaluating it. There's so much stuff out there to go through and just to evaluate what's best for you. I would think is kind of the most draining part of all this. It's exciting to me because it's fun to implement technology. It's fun to come up with solutions. I like to have, you know, a plan, you know, build it, and then have, you know, a conclusion to the end. You're like, oh, that was great. There was some heartaches, but it works. But sometimes just going through all the different, you know, remote access connections that you can have, different softwares, mobility apps, it can just be draining to say, okay, enough's enough. I've walked through 5 or 6 different demos. You know, I just need to make a decision. So.
Yeah, I know one of the things that I've run into a lot is that I can sit there and plan a certain system or something and go down 15 different routes. And then somebody will say, what about this? And I'll go, didn't think of that. Right. And that's where a third person or an outside consultant, someone that, you know, their whole thing is trying to be successful and being thorough, getting all the things. They know what to do to look for things. We may figure them out and know them, and they say, oh, well, yeah, and you should do that. And it's obvious, but having a methodical approach to everything really helps.
Yeah, yes. So.
Any other questions for Kevin here? All right, we've got another story coming up, and originally this was planned from a customer, but much like all customer ventures, they had a problem at the plant, and literally 5 minutes before gave us a note that he won't be able to present. So Marty is going to help walk us through a story, and with that, I'll hand it over to Marty here.
Thanks, Tom. I'm just going to give you an overview of a customer, another utility, a large utility that we've done a lot of work with security-wise. It all started because they had an issue with outside vendors plugging into their network and bad things happening for a variety of reasons. So we started by working with them to upgrade their network so that they could more easily tie it down, lock it down, lock all the ports out, tie to MAC addresses and all the complications that go with that. We then started talking to them about, well, you have other issues besides just outside vendors, and we suggested that they should get an audit done, which they did. They had an audit done by RevSec, who made other recommendations, one of which was to further segment the network, which then we brought in Tempered Network, who worked with them to set up segmentation within their network. In parallel with all this, they were virtualizing their iFix and ended up installing Strata servers to run all of their software on it. So we work as the buffer between these vendors and the customer, and In fact, had some custom software done for the switches they needed, and helped them implement it all. They're 3/4 of the way through the journey now, and things are going on.
What do you think their biggest challenge has been? People, process, or technology?
Yes, some of all of it. The technology's a little ahead of them. It's ahead of the people that are implementing it. They can require a lot of contribution from outside sources, whether it be the vendor or us.
All right. I saw we had a question earlier that escaped me. Someone had asked why was Stratus picked instead of Dell, and I think part of the advantage with the Stratus comes with the high availability as well as the maintenance and on-site support that helps make it a little bit more attractive while eliminating single points of failure.
Do you want me to answer that?
Sure.
Sure. So, so when I refer to the N+2 scenario, so when you make a Dell cluster just with VMware, you always have to have an N+1 available in case of a failure. So if you have 3 nodes is really the minimum you need. And if you have 1 fail, the VMs move over to the 2, and even if you have 2 left, you're done. Another failure and you just lose resources. So that's why I say when you have to have a Dell cluster, you really need an N+2 to have vMotioning and so forth, to take one down for maintenance. So we evaluated the Dell cluster, and we weren't told that at first. We were told, okay, you can do this with 2 Dell servers. And we compared the 2 Dell servers to the Stratix, and by far the Stratix outperformed the 2. You still need to have shared storage between the 2 Dell servers. So you could do it without the shared storage, but then they won't vMotion, and there's other issues with that. And then the other option is to go to a full-blown VxRail, which we do have on the IT side. But again, in my view, OT is more important than IT. I'm probably getting in trouble for saying that, but it is, because you can't have your process go down and lose SCADA for a minute or 2 while an image goes and needs to reboot. So with Stratus, it's fault tolerant, where if you lose a section, your images ride through and keep running. With Dell, you may lose an image for a minute or 2 while it reboots and spins up and gets moved over. So we just decided, especially because the networking was simpler, that we decided to go with, on the OT side, Stratus servers. And then on the IT, we do have Dell VxRails. And there are times we may move an image back and forth in those regards, but that's why. The other thing is, when you go to a Dell system, when you start to look at licensing, so when I licensing, I mean Microsoft licensing, VMware licensing, and then I'm going to say Veeam licensing, which is the software we use for backup. Most of them like to charge per core, and it's any core that it can possibly run on. So if you have 4 servers and each of those servers has, I don't know, 14 cores, guess what now? Now you're licensing for 14 times 4, because it can reside at any moment on any of those 4 servers. Your licensing from a software point of view ends up being a lot cheaper going to a Stratus, because Stratus, even though it's 2 lock-sync servers, it counts as 1, right? It's only seen as 1 actual server. So your licensing ends up being a lot cheaper on a Stratus than it would going your traditional route of, Dell, HP, your VMware cluster.
Thank you. That's a good answer. All right, and I guess with that, I'm going to go through another customer that wasn't able to speak for us. This is a company that does paper. It's kind of a high-end paper. It's some of the glossy stuff you see in magazines. Some of that type of paper is very high value and can cost quite a bit per roll. This one had some federal mandates that they needed to follow and supply chain custody and things like that for things that are of a high specific value. And they really were challenged with many different legacy systems from different vendors. I mean, they kind of were all over the place. They've got multiple facilities and multiple old systems. And I think they had over 300 different PLCs, no single vendor, like 40% one kind, like Allen Bradley, some Siemens, even some Reliance, and very old 500s and things like that. No real good inventory of each site location, all of the various things, multiple SCADA and MES systems, anything from Windows 2K to current. No real direction and no long-term plan, but based on events of recent 10 years on cybersecurity, they were being tasked and they knew it was something they needed to work on. So they came to us looking for some assistance. So how do you get started on something like this? Well, the idea is that we had to sit down and start with the identifying and assessing. We met with some of their stakeholders. We met with the heads of a few of the different departments. We got a little bit of a picture of what they had. We had 3 or 4 different inventory lists that we were able to put together, came from different plants and facilities. And then we looked at trying to assign some priorities, and we talked to some of their people. We introduced them to Revolutionary Security, or RevSec, and decided on a action plan that was going to start with a formal assessment. From there, they were going to move into procurement and implementation. So IT had already had in place a lot of the physical detect and protect type quadrant of information and things like that. So we decided to start off with disaster recovery as the first point of to focus on, and specifically version control, because they had a lot of disparate equipment configuration for firewalls, configuration for PLCs, HMI, and SCADA as well. We decided that having a version control system with the ability to roll back and can, if you lose a piece of equipment, you can quickly restore it with the correct version of the program. The SCADA, knowing who checked in or checked out something, who made changes to things, and why they made changes, would give us a really good bang for the buck to start with. So from there, we went on and implemented that. We used MDT version control to go through and catalog their systems and do automatic backups and recoveries. And from there, we're going to go back to the top again and start over and identify and assess. And that's where they'll come up with the next list of items. So it's really a continuous process, but Revolutionary Security came in, was able to give them a very clear focus of the areas of improvement, things that could be done, things that were necessary, and then the company themselves weighted those with priorities of production and cost of remediation, and came up with various other plans. So it's sort of a long-term multi-phase progress or project. So again, kind of, you know, recapping on where we can help you with stuff. Our buckets, we want to be able to start with you early on in the process, meet with some of your stakeholders, try to understand best what you're trying to do. So starting off with identifying and assessing. From there, we've got solutions that can help you to detect and protect, whether it be, we don't necessarily point at a specific vendor for it. I mean, as Marty described and as Kevin described, sitting down and listening, sometimes you need a certain feature or a certain function that might exist in one versus the other. Segmentation is an example. There's different ways to segment your network. There's different approaches based on what you have in place, how you want to manage it, how do your personnel interact with things. It might be this product this time, it might be a different one the next time. Again, sitting down and understanding better what you're doing, which then takes you into the next phase, being able to respond and alert. What do you do when you detect something like this? How do you handle it? What notifications do you need? Who needs to know about these things? What is the procedure for finding a defect, remediating a defect? What do you want to do when you want to change something in the network, but you haven't done it yet? Do you want to validate it? You want to make sure that is this going to hit everybody else's criteria? If it only works in your case and it puts some other thing at risk, like, okay, I've got remote access, but now I may run at risk from remote interference with something. Have I done what I was supposed to do? It might be what your boss asked at the moment, but maybe in the bigger picture, it's not a long-term goal that you need to understand better how to do it. And then no matter what happens, being able to recover from a breach. It's not really how often, I mean, that you're going to get broken into or something's going to untoward happen. It's like a bulletproof vest. I mean, you're going to get shot a lot of times. Something's going to happen sometimes. So you need to be able to recover from it and prevent it from reoccurring. Again, taking you back to identify and assess. Identify what went wrong, assess what the problems were, and then how to get back and do it again. So with that, we'll go into any other open questions that might come up. We can do hand puppets too. Marty, do you have any, what do we got here for question is version control options. You mentioned one. Yeah, I mentioned MDT. It's a product that we sell, but there's other types of version control. The goal here with version control is to be able to know what changes have been made. And when you look at some of the requirements for NERC and SIP, or critical infrastructure protection, you need to prepare for with procedures. You need to implement things, and then you need to be able to detect when those things fail. So knowing that something has been tampered with means having a before and an after picture. So if you're using version control, whether it be Subversion or Visual Source Safe or a commercial product that's tailored for HMI and SCADA programs like MDT, having something in place, knowing that that's been changed or tampered with is of critical importance. So in a lot of cases, just version controlling your documentation. What were the procedures that we established at the beginning with the initial assessment? Okay, these are the goals. We're going to have a leader of this group for the technicians, a leader for the version control and documentation, things like that. You need to be able to establish, well, when were those provisions changed? What are the passwords? What are the access controls for the various things? Where do the documents reside that tell us what all the mandatory passwords are for getting in and out of the software? Who's got the licenses? All of those things need to be controlled, or at least you have to understand when they've been compromised and when they were established, what are those correct values. So version control can be for the PLC code itself, whether or not a specific rung has been changed. Is this the code that was last downloaded? Is this the version that we show should be running in that PLC? So again, that's one of the areas that MDT can certainly help with. But version control is a topic that's always included in cybersecurity. If you don't know what changed, when it changed, and who changed it, you can't possibly be secure. It's just like coming home and the locks are different, and suddenly you want to know why and how and what. If you don't know who changed them, etc.
So yeah, if there's any other questions from the group, I don't see any at the moment. Feel free to type them in the Q&A window or raise your hand if you want to talk and ask a direct question to Tom and the team here. Tom, as I stall for a minute, any parting thoughts, any closing words for this session that you'd like to share?
The thing I'd say is that reach out. I mean, if you guys have a question, or if any of the teams have a question, we've helped different customers go through different parts of the journey. There are cases where we might not have something, but we'll be open and glad to discuss it with you. You can never really get too much information on cybersecurity. It's always, well, what do you think? I mean, 3 months ago, we wouldn't have thought anything about COVID-19. Yes, it sounded bad, but as you get into it more and more, it's way different. You know, I'm now at a point where I thought telling my kids, yeah, I've seen a lot of different things happen. Did what I ever say I thought the country would shut down for a couple months? No. Remember 9/11, et cetera. But this is something that'll be memorable for many years. So same thing with cybersecurity. A lot of different things that you might not have thought of, other people may have or run into, and knowing how somebody else tripped up is always good. There's a lot of different resources for those things, and we'll put some of those links in the materials and presentations that go out. But even some of the DNI or Director of National Intelligence, some of the other government agencies have a lot of good free information that can help with general guidelines. None of them will provide exact specifications for things other than it should do this or it shouldn't do that. And then sometimes some of the language is not always easy to decipher, you know, standard shall, must, may type wording.
Looks like you got one last question there in the chat. If you want to address that one, then we'll wrap up for the next step.
Yeah, is security in the app layer or the communications layer more important? Security from a cybersecurity perspective doesn't delineate between app or media of communication. So I would say that both are equally important. If you have untoward communications on your network that aren't supposed to be there and they still exist, and they don't compromise the application, that doesn't mean you don't deal with them. You still got something to deal with. So cybersecurity in a whole will not just look at one or the other. Some of the things that I found very interesting is that part of a cybersecurity assessment would be things like badges. Where are the documents physically stored? Because one of the preambles or the prime directives in cybersecurity is that if you don't have physical security of the device or ownership of the device in your hands, you've already lost control of it. You've lost cybersecurity. So a laptop that can be stolen, a desktop that can be stolen, what is it that prevents that? How is that area guarded? How is that regulated? How do you know who came and went into that area? Those are all aspects of cybersecurity that aren't directly obvious when you're dealing with them.
Good, thanks, Tom. And there's one last question here. I'm actually going to ask this one to Kevin because Kevin, I see you're still on the video here. If you're willing to take this one, so the question came in from the audience. You know, once you have all these you know, security measures in place and installed, do you find that it actually takes additional staff or contracts or people to make all this come together? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I mean, so any time you have new technology, you have to find the right people and staff to do so. I mean, we had to find staff when we decided to virtualize. Sometimes you can have staff who can learn new technology, which is preferred. I mean, when I hire guys, I prefer guys who can think critically on their own and can embrace new technology versus someone who just looks good on paper and has a lot of knowledge. So the short answer is yes. You know, again, that's why we hired a cybersecurity consultant. You know, on the IT side, we went to SharePoint, so there's the learning curve there. You know, so there's different technologies you need. And as I mentioned before, though, I mean, we started out having to have an IT guy specifically for OT, but it shouldn't be that way. Just if you have a guy in IT who knows networking, help the OT department out with their networking, right? Share resources between departments. I know it sounds simple, but I always hear on all the conferences, you know, that IT and OT is divided, and it's because they don't understand each other, which is fine. But you know, the finance department doesn't understand what IT does, and we help them out. So I just think it's better just to everyone play nice, and if you have resources in one department, use them in the other department.
Yeah, it's a good point. That's one of the often, you know, can be challenging parts of this is the people part of the people process and technology. So thanks for clarifying there.
We've got two other questions here, and I'll grab them both, I believe. First one is wireless mesh okay for cybersecurity? The short answer is yes, it's okay for cybersecurity, but it doesn't necessarily provide security just in and of itself being a wireless mesh. You can have a secure mesh or you can have a wide open mesh. So cybersecurity wouldn't really be dedicated on how your wireless is accessed. Another question was, do OEMs or original equipment manufacturers follow similar cyber approaches? for high valued assets in the field. And I can answer that for sure. When I worked at GE and Kevin Peterson was there, he worked on the turbine controls and remote monitoring and diagnostics. All of that high value stuff had the standard GE cybersecurity rules for IT access and OT access built in. They might have had a large department of people to put together procedures and documents and more stuff to slow the process down, but absolutely they do. But a cybersecure or something that has cybersecurity is not, again, something that you can just purchase. It is, again, people, process, and technology, all three together working in concert. And towards what Kevin said, involving other departments often is really important because you can't just segment one versus the other. It's always going to come back to shared media, shared networking at one point or another.